I want to talk about past trauma and healing from past trauma. Are you someone that experiences a lot of bad things, so bad relationships, or just in general feels bad luck? Or are you struggling to manifest things, so the things that you desire so deeply are just not coming in? Or are you actually experiencing physical pain? A lot of these things can be caused by past trauma. Before we can manifest our desires, we also need to release the old, release the baggage, release past memories or things that are still haunting us, past trauma, which is like noise on your radio. I always talk about manifestation in terms of frequencies, right? So you're the radio constantly emitting frequencies, and the universe is all of these radio channels. Now, if you're carrying trauma with you, this is like noise on your little radio. The trauma is still manifesting bad experiences to you, holding us back from reaching higher levels of awareness, manifesting our desires, just feeling better overall. And you can recognize trauma in the form of anxiety, panic attacks, triggers in your daily life, actual physical pain, physical injuries. You are manifesting these based on the trauma that you're still carrying with you, which is as a sort of like lower vibrational frequency noise on your radio, attracting lower vibrational events happening to you because the trauma wants to be felt. The trauma wants to be released. If we don't know how to heal from it or acknowledge it, this cycle can go on for a long time, this karmic cycle. So let me talk about how to identify your trauma and then also how to heal from it. My name is Davy. I am a PhD student in chemical engineering at the University of Cambridge. In my free time, I love to study topics in psychology, self-development, law of attraction. But today I want to talk about past trauma. First, I want to talk about what trauma is. Secondly, how you identify your trauma. And then thirdly, how can you heal from your trauma? Now, first of all, what is trauma? Trauma can come in many forms. Sometimes we are aware of our trauma. When we think about it, it still invokes a lot of negative emotions in us. That is the conscious trauma. We also are often carrying a lot of subconscious trauma with us. Especially when bad things keep happening to you and you don't understand why they are manifesting. It is likely because there is a subconscious trauma that still wants to resurface and still manifest bad experiences. A little bit about the psychology of trauma. What happens in trauma is a dissociation of the two hemispheres of the brain. So you have your left brain, which is all about ratio, language, reasoning. You could say the ego actually. And the right brain, which is all about the sensitive, creative and playful energies, the soul, so to say. In this moment of trauma, there's a splitting between the two hemispheres, so between the two sides of the brain. What this means is that there is a dissociation of consciousness. So how you can see this is that there is such a bad thing happening to you, but because the emotion is so strong and intense and negative, you have this protective mechanism where your consciousness can dissociate, so that you don't have to experience all the pain at once, basically. It is a protection mechanism that is installed in you. So what happens is the splitting of the two hemispheres, but then because the emotion is not truly felt and experienced at the time, it is permanently stored in your vibration and your personality is split. Whatever the negative emotion is, if it is too strong that the person subconsciously feels the need to dissociate from the emotion, it gets stored in a permanent vibration. When we talk about childhood trauma, we can talk about the inner child. What happens in trauma that is formed during childhood is that the child, who is very subjective and a function of its external environment, right? It is really dependent on the parents or whoever the caretaker is. If something traumatic happens where the child doesn't feel supported, the child dissociates and has to be the parent in their head, right? They have to take responsibility if there is no parent there to lean on. And that inner child that wants to be vulnerable sort of gets locked away. Especially for kids that have been through a lot of trauma, you see them maturing really early on because they have to be that parent for themselves from a very young age. But you have to imagine that at the same time, this inner child, this vulnerable part of them that still needed a parent, that still actually craved support, because that is just the way we're wired, is stored away in their permanent vibration and is a big root of trauma and can still be a big subconscious root of maybe anxiety during adulthood. So trauma is a coping mechanism. The splitting of the hemispheres is a coping mechanism. It is even to the extent that what the brain does as well is whatever the traumatic event is. Maybe it is a very severe thing during childhood, maybe it is abuse, maybe it is a very toxic relationship. Because we have to deal with the situation, the brain dissociates and sort of classifies the bad experience as good. The definition of good and bad get reversed. Whatever is happening, which should have been a bad experience, is now in the brain classified as good. So this is also why people that had a very toxic parent growing up end up in toxic relationships, because they resonate. There's a part of them that feels good with the toxicity. They classify the toxicity as safety in the brain because that is the comforting feeling it gives. And the only way we can reverse this if we integrate these two parts of the brain again, and this is what trauma healing is about. Let's get to the second part, which is how can we identify our trauma? Some trauma is in our conscious mind, right? Actual memories that are still invoking a lot of negative emotions. Maybe it is a breakup, maybe it is a situation during childhood, maybe it is just a rejection at work. Whatever it is, don't disacknowledge. Maybe some things that wouldn't be considered traumatic to some people are traumatic for other people, right? There's no judgment what could invoke trauma in us. Now, the most and the hardest part is to identify our subconscious trauma. How can we study our trauma? There are a few things that we can look at. The first thing we can look at to study our trauma is finding out what triggers us. Find out during the day what things invoke negative emotions in you. Because often the things that invoke negative emotions in us are not the actual thing that is causing that. We were already carrying that emotion with us and the situation is just letting it come out. So the first thing to start to study our trauma is to start to look at what triggers us in daily life. For example, when a friend is not texting you back, does that really trigger you? It could be a clue of some subconscious trauma or attachment issues that might be below the surface that had nothing to do with that friend or the text. Or when are moments where you feel really insecure and judged? What are moments where you feel like you can't be yourself? Or are there situations in your life where you just feel very stressed and rushed and anxious? Emotions come out when we're already carrying them with us. So whenever something makes us angry, the anger was already in us. Whenever something makes us anxious, the anxiety was already in us. It is never the external experience that is causing any of these emotions. It is always because we were carrying these emotions with us. And a lot of these emotions can be traced back to trauma. And starting to study what triggers you day in, day out, maybe journaling about it every day. Perhaps in that case, you can find a pattern and see similarities in whenever that specific anxiety or specific negative emotion arises in you. And you can start to study the pattern that you see in it. And then you go back by yourself and start to think about, when have I felt this emotion before, right? What are other situations that I can recall that make me feel similar to these negative emotions that I'm now experiencing during this trigger? Go as back as childhood and start to also journal moments in childhood that you can still recall that invoked a lot of negative emotion in you, no matter how minor the experience was. And that is how you start to study your trauma and triggers and try to trace them back to the earliest memory that you can think of when you have felt this way before. And meditation, I find, is the most useful way to delve deeper into the subconscious mind. And in my manifestation course, link is in the description, there's also 1 week where we fully work on trauma, and I have a guided meditation to help you get to the subconscious mind and study it. But either way, what it is truly about is about sitting with whatever you identified as a trigger in your daily life, or whatever memory you could think of that was triggering to you, and start to go deeper within yourself and ask questions about when was the first time you felt this. Now, another thing to look for is what other sources of negativity are still currently present in your life, whether it is in specific relationships, toxic friendships, whether it is you watching a lot of murder mysteries and criminal shows. What are some sources of negativity that are still in your life? You have to think about it. Why is this resonating with you? One thing to understand about past trauma and these negative stored emotions that we're carrying with us is that they want to be felt. They want to come out. They love to resonate. That's why they're still manifesting things happening to us. But other ways they like to come out is through the type of content we like to watch. So if we love to watch a lot of murder mystery, there is a specific part of us that resonates with that darkness, that is likely a form of trauma that wants to come out and that resonates with that negativity. So if you find yourself gravitating towards a lot of negative content, or those types of documentaries and shows, or those types of people, like toxic relationships, toxic friendships, through journaling or through meditation, go within and start to do some self-reflection in terms of, when have I felt those types of emotions before? Why is this resonating with me? And just posing these questions to your conscious mind is enough. Sometimes we don't get the answer immediately, but the answer can be presented to us later in our experience. So don't worry too much if this seems hard, or if you're not really getting any answers in the beginning. That is fine, but the fact that you're posing these questions and you're studying and you're trying to do this inner work, the answer will be presented to you. God wants you to heal, right? You will be guided and you will be helped in this process. So do ask for help in your healing, and do ask for light to be shed on the darkness in you and the trauma that you're still carrying with you, because you don't have to do all of this alone. Now, another big form of trauma, and a lot of people don't realize this, is physical pain. Is there any physical pain in your body? Maybe you always have tonsillitis and throat issues. Maybe you always have headaches and migraines. Maybe you have upper back problems. Maybe you have lower back problems. Whatever physical pain or physical injuries you're experiencing, this could be a result of trauma. IBS, TMJ, all indicators of trauma. The body and mind connection that is proven in science, actually, how your mental health can affect your physical health. I'll link my video up here on that. Is another way that our trauma comes out, and in those cases it is very often subconscious, because we feel the pain but we don't know what is causing the pain, right? So especially in those cases, we can go deep into a meditative state, find the pain, and start to ask the pain questions. Now, again, in my manifestation course, in the 5-week manifestation course, there's one whole week where we spent on trauma healing, and I have a specific meditation that addresses those types of issues and tries to find trauma in that way. Now let's talk about trauma healing. Before I get practical and actually give you some practices that you can do, I want to talk about what healing is about. As I defined earlier, the splitting of the personality, or the splitting of the hemispheres, is what is causing the trauma. Now, what can heal the trauma? It is by bringing the trauma into awareness. Awareness of trauma is where the healing starts, right? So once we become aware, whenever something triggers us and we're like, oh, yeah, this is based on my previous trauma, you have to already imagine that you're not submerged in the emotion anymore. You're observing it and you are witnessing it, and you are soul that is in awareness. That is the first step in healing. That is the first part, talking about actual practically trauma healing. Now, the beauty of trauma is that it is often stored somewhere in our body. That is the way trauma works. There was a potency of emotion that wasn't be able to felt, so that potency gets stored somewhere, a potency of energy, and that often happens in our body. Whether it is an actual physical injury that is now manifesting into physical pain and symptoms, or whether it is not something that we're aware of, our trauma is somewhere stored in our body. And we can use this to release the trauma without thinking about it too much, which is through yoga, through somatic exercises, or through stretches, however you want to call it. All of our emotions are stored somewhere along our spine, that is our chakra system, and different type of trauma will store at different heights along our spine depending on with which emotion it has to do. I can show a chart over here of the chakras and the types of frequencies that are associated with each of the chakras. Without needing much of an understanding of it, you can still use stretches, somatic exercises, and yoga as a way to release. This is also, maybe you've seen these videos on the internet, releasing emotion through somatic exercises, right? Hip stretches. A lot of people store a lot of their emotions in their hips. So try to get in a meditative state. So, you know, do some breathing exercises and put on some frequency music, and then just start to do some stretches whilst being very aware of the fact that you're trying to find trauma, right? And trying to, at the same time, ask yourself, what is coming up as I'm doing these hip stretches or as I'm doing this somatic exercise? Another great way to heal trauma is through meditation, because meditation is more also to bring your trauma into awareness, right? To identify it. And there have been so many trauma healing meditations that I've done where, even though I knew that there were situations that upset me at the time, I never let the emotions fully out. So that trauma healing meditation just ends up in a big cry where everything comes out, but a good cry, right? It's like a releasing cry where you finally acknowledge your pain and let yourself feel the emotion and be that sort of support and pat on the back almost for yourself. Like, yeah, you are allowed to feel that way, right? That is a lot of the trauma healing, I think, which is letting the emotion out, right? Acknowledging the emotion. They call it inner child healing because you are lending the compassion to yourself like a parent would to their child, whatever trauma you've been through. So really step into that sort of highest self or parent role towards yourself, where you just lend a lot of compassion to whatever you've been through once you've identified it. And that often comes, for me, it's crying. I'm a water sign, so all my emotions come out through my tears. But however, which way it is, just acknowledgement maybe for some people can be enough. Now, if you need more guidance on healing from trauma, I've launched my very own 5-week self-development manifestation course, and 1 week is specifically dedicated to trauma healing. I'm providing a guided meditation specifically for trauma healing as well. A lot of people have given me a lot of positive feedback, how much they've cried during those meditations. That is the aim, even though I don't want people to cry, but that is the aim, right? We want to get to the subconscious mind. We want to get the emotions out. Now, the course is not only about trauma healing. That is just 1 week. The other weeks, there's another week on the self-concept. There's another week on working with thought frequencies. And then week 4 and 5 are really about the manifestation techniques and scripting techniques. But in week 3, this trauma healing is a big part of manifesting your desires, right? We need to release the old. We need to release the baggage in order to get to higher frequencies. And that is what I want to guide you on. Facilitating an identity shift into a higher version of you. That is the aim of my course. And also to change your life. People have been really positive about the course. So thank you so much for everyone that has been giving me some feedback. And I would love to see you on it. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate if you made it this far. Definitely leave me a like if there was anything that you found useful. Subscribe to my channel, that really helps. And also come check me out on Instagram, which is Davy_Citram. And I would love to see you in my next video. Sending you my love.